Panama, New York. Here we are at the Panama Diner, and it's veteran-owned diner. But a little bit about you, and was your mom and dad, were they kind of, first of all, veterans, and second of all, were they kind of in the business you're in now?
Well, my dad was Army. He spent 2 years in the Army as a map maker. But what I remember looking through his paperwork and stuff is he did drawings of airplanes while he was in the military. So I come from a large family, 5 brothers, 2 sisters. My dad always considered the military as a great career choice. He was a teacher, but my oldest brother, after graduating from high school, went in the military.
This was Warren, Pennsylvania?
And this was in Warren, Pennsylvania. Went in the military for 4 years, got out and went to college. And I looked at that and said, wow, that's a way to get my college paid for. So for me, my second brother then went in the Navy. So when it was my choice to graduate from high school, I thought, well, I didn't have enough for college. I definitely wanted to go to college. But it was an easy step or easy decision to say, hey, I should join the military. So I did. And that was in 1978.
So you graduated from Warren High School?
Yes.
What year?
1978.
1978. So
And then that immediately after, I signed up for the Air Force.
Why that? Your brothers, one was in the Army, one was in the
Right.
Navy?
Well, my oldest brother was Air Force first, and then he switched to Army.
Okay.
My second brother was Navy. Just not having too much knowledge of what the different branches meant. The Air Force seemed like a good choice. I mean, it was pretty simple. It didn't seem too gung-ho.
Were you influenced at all by your dad's drawings of airplanes?
I think I was. Looking at photos of him in the military, he was very distinguished always. And the Air Force fascinated me. Flying fascinated me. I never became a pilot. I never did any of that. But just the idea of being in the Air Force fascinated me.
So you enlist in the Air Force in boot camp. Where's that?
Texas.
Texas.
Lackland Air Force Base in Texas. Now, having brothers who were in the military ahead of me, I was very prepared for boot camp. I knew what to expect. I was told that they would yell at you and scream at you and break you down, but it wasn't anything personal. And so I accepted that. I knew going in that, okay, here we go. This is what their job is to do that. So boot camp was pretty easy for me. Psychologically, it didn't bother me at all. Physically, well, I was 18 years old. I was physically fit. I didn't have any problems meeting any of their criteria as far as that went. I think the one thing that stood out is when I went there, they give you a rule book of how things are going to be and how exact things have to be. And in our dorm, we had a foot locker at the end of the bed, and you know, reading through the manuals, things had to be, your underwear had to be folded in 6-inch squares, and your t-shirts had to be a certain size. And I read it, took out a ruler, measured everything, had everything in my foot locker. The TI walks into the room one day and beginning of boot camp and says, okay, we're going to instruct you on how to set up your foot locker. Grab me a foot locker, and he grabs my foot locker, pulls it, opens it, and just sits there going, oh, well, I think I need a different foot locker. So he shoves that one back, grabs somebody else, and he goes, yeah, okay, here's how you fold up this stuff. My locker had been set up. I knew exactly what to do, how to set it up, and get it going. He never called on me after that.
No kidding.
For anything.
Did any of your fellow colleagues look at you and go, who the hell are you?
They did. I mean, they came to me and go, what did you do? How did you do this? What did you get done?
Yeah.
And I said, it's just a matter of following, you know, look at the pictures, look at the things, let's set this up. I learned that, you know, a piece of trash in a trash can meant the trash can was full and needed emptied. So you never actually put trash into a trash can. You would take it outside and put it in the dumpster. Every piece of paper, anything you had. But yeah, boot camp was easy. I didn't have any problems there.
So that's about 6 weeks?
Yeah. And then you get to go to your training. You were able to pick your career. You had 3 choices that you were allowed to do. And they would give you a listing of, after a series of tests, they said you're qualified for these things. I was pretty much qualified for anything. Mm-hmm. So just looking through the list, law enforcement appealed to me. So when I saw military police on there, security police for the Air Force, I said, that sounds good. That's what I want to do.
Had you been exposed in your prior life in high school to police force?
No, I hadn't. But I knew, I mean, there were a lot of jobs I didn't have a desire for. I didn't want to be a plumber or a maintenance person. I wanted something that was more office oriented, I guess. Mm-hmm. So police sounded good. So off I went to the Air Force Police Academy, also in Texas, and went through police training, and it was fun. I enjoyed it. It was good. Also went through combat training at Camp Bullis in Texas. Again, a great time. I'm not an outdoors person, but I remember doing war games where we were outside for days at a time, and it raining and mud all over everything. But it was okay. I still enjoyed it. I had fun. I tried to. I was very diligent on trying to follow the rules and the things that they had taught us about going on marches and surveillance and things of that nature.
Obviously, part and parcel of that is firearms training.
Yes.
Did you get pretty good about that? You're pretty good at it?
Yeah. I did qualify as expert on firearms. I had never used a weapon prior to going in the military, ever. Wow. Never even saw one. So going there and being handed an M16, and it was intimidating until I got very comfortable using it, going to the range, practicing with it. That was a new experience for me.
I'm always curious, as you're learning, and clearly you have a number of people learning at the same time, whether there's a sense of competition. Like, all right, guys, the 10 of you, let's see who's the best. Is there any of that?
I would say there's a little bit of it, but you work more as a team than you did as a competition. I remember people who weren't quite as proficient in using guns, and those who were said, okay, sit next to me and then I'll shoot a round or two into your target so that you qualify to make sure that, you know, everybody there was well. And even in basic training in the dorm, I mean, I would make other people's beds to make sure that we had it all perfect. I mean, the idea was that when your drill instructor walked in the room, you wanted everything perfect. You didn't want to give him a reason to be yelling or screaming at you.
You'd already done enough push-ups and...
Yes. Yeah, and I think that's what the military was promoting. I mean, when they break you down, it's so that everybody's at the same starting level, and then they kind of build you up so that you do work together. I don't care what your background was. You're there all together to do a job.
Handguns, rifles, everything?
Yeah, I trained in 38, M16s, M60 machine guns, grenade launchers we used. Yeah, it was interesting.
So you get through that aspect, phase through, then next. What's next?
Well, while I was at the police academy, the Presidential Honor Guard had a group come down and said they were recruiting for people in Washington, D.C. to do security. And I said, oh, well, that sounds interesting. So they had some criteria. At the point I was at the police academy, I had already gained a secret clearance. They had gone back and talked to high school teachers and friends. And that was one of their criteria, was that you had to be able to obtain a top secret when you're in DC. So I had that. I liked the idea of being spit and shine type thing. I mean, that appealed to me. I enjoyed being in my Class A uniform. That was a good feeling. So I met their criteria for height, just barely. You had to be 6'3", I was 6'3". I had the security clearance, and I had the willingness to, as they said, there's Air Force rules and then there's Honor Guard rules, which are a little bit above what the Air Force, and you had to commit to doing that. So I signed up and said yes, I wanted to do it.
For instance, what would be the extra added Honor Guard criteria?
Well, both on and off duty, they wanted people who would be extremely professional. Things that they explained to me is, when you go out to dinner, if you go out to a bar, it's okay to go to a bar and have a drink. It's not okay to ever get drunk, ever, in any instance, no way, no time. You had to have social skills that were appropriate pretty much in all occasions. There was never a time where you would get in an argument, where you would be swearing. Anything that would be deemed, I guess, inappropriate in any social situation. And after I finished the police academy, I got orders to Washington, where you start going through training. And they, again, start with doing a background check on you and finding out everything. And I mean everything about you. Despite notifying my parents that, I was going through this, they would call up and say, hey, listen, your high school teachers are calling us. They're saying the FBI is here wanting to know about you, wanting to know who your affiliates, who your friends were. Friends would call saying, hey, they're asking about your girlfriend you had in high school, and things of that nature. So these background checks allowed them to do the training that they needed to do, because you were put at attention, and my sergeants, my commissioned officers in charge would come up at attention and start saying things to you. They would talk about your girlfriend. They would talk about your parents, your brothers, your sisters, just to see if they could break you. See at what point would you break down and say, okay, stop it, this is it, or punch them. And that was the idea, was that you had to take it. You had to take anything they threw at you. I didn't have much of a problem. I don't think there was too many bad things in my past that I had to worry about. But I also understood what they were doing.
Did you witness anybody in your class that they did break?
Oh, yes. Yeah, I'm not sure of what the percentage is that actually make it into the honor guard once you've been there, but there were several people I remember that just said, that's it, I'm done, I'm out of here, I'm not going to do this. Just because there is that psychological training that you have to go through, and I think that was the hardest part. In the honor guard, you're also learning to do additional weapons. We used Uzis, we used M16 Mighty Might, which is a shortened barrel of an M16 and a retractable stock. So it was a very small M16 that you would use from the hip as opposed to aiming and shooting. So a little bit different weapons. And you did train on that I think on a daily basis for the beginning part of that, so that you knew exactly what you were doing.
You know, just for the camera,
yeah.
Mark, when you use the term honor guard, what's that mean? Okay,
so the honor guard is a ceremonial guards unit. And there is an honor guard at each and every base, and that typically you're there to post the colors, the American flag. At any ceremony, there's of course your American flag, your Air Force flag, or other military flags, and guards. In any parade, anything, anytime the military is represented, you want that unit there. Honor guards are also used for, well known for military funerals. So you have your pallbearers, your 7-man team for the 21-gun salute, and that's available throughout the country at different bases. The one in Washington that I was at was the Presidential Honor Guard. This is for any presidential function that the president or high-ranking officials feel there needs to be some type of military presence there. So anytime there is a state dinner at the White House, any type of publicity at the Capitol, when you have the president speaking or anyone very high-ranking in the government speaking, they want a military presence, you would be there. Funerals at Arlington National Cemetery, which involved, even depending on the rank of the person, could involve up to a full caisson and hundreds of troops being there marching, as well as the pallbearers and the 21-gun salute, bugler. Those were pretty typical things. We did at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, the guard that walks back and forth up there is part of the Army Honor Guard. Mm-hmm. It's considered the Old Guard, and that's a division within the Honor Guard. Most of what I did in Washington was joint service. So, despite the fact that I was Air Force, I would say most of the time that we did ceremonies, it was joint service. So there was usually a Army general or colonel in charge. And we would all be working together to do whichever ceremony they wanted.
So when you go to a ceremony and you leave the base, how do you, I'm just thinking about the logistics.
The logistics of it?
Yes.
So it starts out, first thing in the morning, you have roll call. And I can't remember, it must have been like 5:30 in the morning. We had a dormitory dedicated to us. It was the Honor Guard dormitory. We had the dormitory. The first floor was the armory. Everything was spit and shine in that dormitory. Every single thing in there. They used that for foreign dignitaries to come and view the military. So if you walked into a dorm room, the beds were made perfect. If you opened the closets, the uniforms were spaced exactly 2 inches apart. There were no variances ever in that. So you go down to the day room in the morning, they'd have a list of things that were going on that day. Mm-hmm. They'll say, okay, we need these 4 people, you 4 are going to this funeral, you 6 people are doing this, you guys are going to the White House, you guys are going to the Capitol. And they divide everybody up into different units and exactly what you were doing. They tended to post that the day before on a bulletin board, but that morning you'd get your last briefing. We also got briefings there at that time about possible security risks that we were going to be involved in, especially if you're going to something public where anytime the public's involved, there's always security involved. And so you'd get a report from the FBI saying, okay, we've had these threats made, these that we consider viable. So we're going to be on the lookout for certain people or certain groups that may be there at that time. Once you get your orders for that day, you get the uniform that you're going to wear. Now, when I was there, we wore...
It changes?
It did, because if you were... We had... typically, we wore a black uniform with silver trim on it. But we were also issued a tuxedo if you were working inside. And there are occasions, and we had a jumpsuit that we would wear if we're traveling long distances. So yeah, there are some variations to what we would do. But typically you go back, you get dressed, and you'd meet down either in the day room or outside where you'd have your first inspection. Spit and shine, they'd go through everyone, every detail. And at that point, if something needed corrected, they'd send you back. Nope, this isn't good enough. This button is wrong. This is coming off. You have ropes hanging from your uniform, which to them a thread is a rope. Even an eighth of an inch thread on your uniform had to be corrected. They'd send you back. You'd have your inspection. They'd call you back for inspection right prior to leaving. You come down, you have your inspection. If it was close by, and we were stationed at Bowling Air Force Base, which is very close to the Capitol and the White House, we would load the bus. One thing about when you're in uniform, you don't sit down. So the point of seats on a bus made no sense to me. You stood up. You could not. You hang on the rail. You could not have any creases in your pants when you got there. So there was no way you would sit down for any reason. Once you arrive at the destination, we usually went over what was going on. Sometimes there were practices done. And once we went through all that before the ceremony, again, you have another inspection where you start again. And this time they're again checking for anything that could possibly be wrong. And you had to correct it. The bigger the ceremony, the more extra people were around just in case something happened.
Like a seamstress, was there people, or did you?
Well, we did.
Did you have to do it yourself?
We actually did our own.
Really?
Our uniform, when you're issued a uniform in the military, and whether it's the ceremonial uniform, our black uniform, or whether it's your regular Class A uniform, our Class A uniforms that the military had, you were issued and they came with all your buttons and all your things on. We immediately took off all those buttons. We had shiny silver buttons, and all of our work were a super shiny thing that you had to sew on yourself onto your uniform. There was always sewing kits on the buses when we went places, just in case something happened. There were always extra pieces to your uniform. The ropes on the side, they had a bag of extra ropes, extra belt buckles, extra buttons that were there. But then you had your ceremony, you got all ready, and once it started, that was it.
So normally a ceremony, which is a speech, or something
Yes.
that's, there's a podium,
Yeah.
you wouldn't necessarily practice with the speaker.
No.
I mean, you're
No, they would just use a stand-in.
standing. And
for it.
then all of a sudden, were you basically posted on the sides of the
Yes.
podium type of thing?
Yes,
So
absolutely.
you're the photo op.
So we're the photo op, so you're in the background. I remember being there the first couple months when it's new and it's exciting, calling home to my parents going, the president's going to be doing a speech. I'm on the right-hand side behind him. Look for me. They'd come back and say, yeah, which one were you? We can tell which person you were.
The idea is to sort of blend in, you know.
You do.
Hi, I'm Mark.
Yeah, there's no big thing. The nice thing is the White House had a photographer, a professional photographer, of course, at every event. And in the press room, they kept all the photographs. So we would have someone from the unit going up there every week, just going through the photos, and anything that had our unit, he would pull and bring
That's
back
great.
to,
So
to
cool.
hand out to people. But typically, yeah, we were the background.
Were you on the ready, in the sense that if they told you, because you're the president, is
Yes.
in front of you, you're on the back, and you're looking.
Yes,
I mean, part of your, it sounded like part of your job is to be on the look.
yes.
Were you armed?
Depending on what you were doing at that point. But yes, members of the Honor Guard were always armed. If you're posting the colors, you have an M1 rifle, and that was not loaded. But your NCOIC would be armed with you,
Okay.
whoever is there. Depending on what assignment would depict how you were armed.
So I'm visualizing where it's just general plain vanilla. A
Yep.
man of significance is in front of you. There's kind of posted 2 on each side, and maybe a 4.
Yes.
Foursome, is that kind
Yes.
of normal? And
Yeah.
off center or off, there's a guy with a gun.
Yes,
Who's your NCO?
yes, absolutely.
Okay, anyways. Was there a shock and awe at all at this point? So the first time you are all gussied up and there's the President of the United States, like, holy cow, I am that
Yes, there is, especially initially when you first begin. Extremely nervous, standing there and watching the president walk right in front of you.
Did you have instructions not to do one of these type of things?
Oh yeah, oh yeah. Training was there. You never looked, never even thought about looking anywhere except forward. One of my greatest memories of presidents, and I mean, you're instructed. You don't talk to anyone. You don't speak. Was we had a detail at the White House for some promotion. This is when President Carter was in office, and we were outside the White House early in the morning, and just basically standing around waiting for instructions and things. And pretty soon, Secret Service comes jogging past, and someone in the unit called us to attention immediately. And it was like, oh, this is different, this is odd. And here comes President Carter jogging around the White House, which is great. I mean, you're immediately at attention. And you're taught that anytime you see anybody of importance above your rank, that you call the unit to attention. Anybody can do it, and the second you hear detail 10 hut, your attention. President Carter comes, he decides to stop and talk to us. Now, you're taught you can't initiate any conversation with the president, but he wanted to know who people were, and so he walked up to each person and he said, "Hi, where are you from?" So you obviously can answer the president, but you're standing at attention the whole time.
Are you looking at him?
I did look at him when he. I did. I looked at him with eye contact because he asked me a question, and it's like, wait, this is the president. He's like a human being. He's a person, and you don't think of that when you're imagining the president. You don't visualize him as an actual human being. So that was a great instance where you actually spoke to the president, and I would say in other occasions he always acknowledged whoever was in the room, whoever was at the podium. He always, would not necessarily say hello, but definitely acknowledge that you were there, and he saw you, and he was aware that you were there. So it was kind of interesting.
Who else would you recall as sort of dignitaries that you stood behind?
Well, I was also there for President Reagan. Different personalities. President Reagan, if you were standing there, other than the initial, we were, I won't say introduced, but we were acknowledged by each of the higher people in Washington. President Reagan, I believe, because he came from a society where he had servants around and there were people there all the time, we were just background to him.
Yeah.
He never even, didn't even notice you. He would, if he walked through a doorway and you were on one side, nod to you or something, but typically you were just there. President Carter always knew you were a person in the room. He always looked around to see who was in the room with him.
So, again, I'm looking at the room, an event.
Yes.
Like an event where normally, again, the two of you on each side, he's somebody speaking, your photo op.
Yes.
After that is over, the ladies and gentlemen, they we hail to the chief, he leaves. Do you have any other role? Do you usher him out? Do you walk the president out? Do you do any kind of...
Not typically, no. There are a lot of security around the president.
Sure.
You have Secret Service, you have White House Police, which is their own police force. You have Metro Police, which is Washington, D.C. police. You have the FBI, who are all over the place. And then you have the Honor Guard, which we looked as the president as commander-in-chief. That's who we're protecting as the commander-in-chief of our unit. Once the ceremony was over, typically we would just leave. However, you're marching off. You're done
You're
until
not casually.
No, you're definitely marching off until you're totally out of sight of any spectator. You were never put at ease when there was a spectator there.
So that was part of the strategy when your CO knew exactly where he's going to end up.
Yeah, and I will say there was a situation where we were at a full military funeral, meaning everybody was there. Dead of winter at Arlington Cemetery. And we stood out there. It was snowing terribly, and the ceremony went off perfectly. But the people took their time leaving. And so we're standing there, and we just stood there. You stand until the last person is out of sight at Arlington.
How do you stand? I mean, you often see people saying at ease,
yes,
so that you're not
stiff.
Yeah.
If you're going to be in a ceremony for a very long time, they do try to change positions so that you're not standing there. But I will say the training we did was hours at a time, standing at attention.
Jeez.
And we practiced every day. We practiced every type of ceremony that's imaginable that would happen in Washington. We stood at attention, and you're put at attention. Your CO walks away, and you're there. And at some point you go, wait, does anybody even know I'm here? I mean, I've been here for, 45 minutes and I haven't seen a person. There's nobody around. Do I stay? Do I turn around and look? Where is he? But that's part of the training. And you get that.
Do they teach you technique? We see the body stiff.
Yeah.
Do they give you exercises to kind of...
All right. So you want a secret? Because people could faint and do faint when they're standing at attention. And so if someone faints, of course, you want smelling salts and stuff. People who were prone to faint had smelling salts taped to the brim of their hat. Underneath the brim, there was a capsule taped there. And if the typical response was if a CO noticed that somebody was wobbling at any point or doing it, he'd call you to present arms, which with a rifle means you bring it up to here. And they could hit that so that the smelling salt would hit their face.
So the guy...
he would just pop that when he did it. Because even though that was wrong for that movement, that was much better than him fainting in the middle of a ceremony. I had some great opportunities when I was there. You get, as an honor guard person, you can volunteer to do other duties. I'm into music and theater. I always have been. So when there were famous people coming to do performances for senators and things, those were usually closed units. But they would like honor guard people there for security purposes, and I would always volunteer. So,
for
example, I talk about the time that I made out with Barbara Mandrell. Barbara Mandrell, nice country singer.
Absolutely.
There was a performance in D.C. at one of their venues where a lot of senators were present. And so they had us there for security purposes. I was assigned a back door, which was locked, and I was just there just in case something happened. I was in that hallway. I was not at attention, but I was in uniform. And it just happened to be where the performers had their dressing rooms. Barbara Mandrell's was right there next to me. So when she came in, her entourage takes her into her dressing room. Well, she comes out and she goes, well, hi, are you guarding me? And of course, we're guarding the people there, but there are certain dignitaries upstairs that needed things. She goes, oh, thanks, I feel much safer. Throughout the night, she would come in and go out, and she would always say hello and stuff. At the end of the performance, she came out and she goes, oh, I just want to thank you for keeping me safe. And she says, come here. And I bent down and she kissed me on the cheek.
There we go.
So I've turned that into making out with me.
Well, I would too, yeah.
Over the years, it's been. But it was fun meeting some of these people, or being up close to some of these people that you only see on TV or only on stage.
So in fact, at that point you are literally security.
We were definitely security.
You're not
right.
guard, but posted security.
Yeah, we're posted security.
Making sure nothing untoward.
Right. And that was true. And yeah, part of the training that we get, we're there for ceremonial purposes mostly, but security was number one and forefront in anything we did. And doing that, we were trained in what to do, like with a defector from another country. So we were always taught that, dignitaries are coming in from all these other countries. Now, the number one man isn't going to defect because he's the number one man, but the number 3 or number 4 person may want to defect and provide us with some information about their country. So we had to know the location of all the safe houses throughout Washington, Virginia, and Maryland, and be able to escort that person to a safe house immediately without tipping off the rest of the people.
Interesting. Did you recall that happening?
I never had that happen during the time.
But you were trained.
But we were trained in it, and we were, it was explained to us exactly how to do it, take care of those people, and get them out of the group situation so that we could separate them and take them. I remember being told we can take any military vehicle that was available anywhere. You just put them in, notify someone else, and start driving.
Cool.
I also know that we were actually on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So in the military, you get leave time, you get time off. You always had to let the base know where you were going and what you were doing. Even if you were going out for dinner or just out to party with friends, the base had to know how to contact you. And this was prior to cell phones, so they had to have phone numbers and things. If you were traveling, we actually carried a card with us that if a major event happened, and typically what we practiced were the death of a president or former president, we had to be back in Washington immediately. So we carried a card with us that would allow us on any aircraft, anytime, to get back to DC. Which was kind of interesting because they said you just walk up to the ticket desk, show them a card, say I need a trip to DC now, and they'll take you. So that was always a cool thing to have in your wallet.
That's power, man. I'm looking at the picture here to your left, my right, which looks like, is that the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier?
It is.
What's that?
So that would have been a wreath laying. Anytime a foreign dignitary comes to Washington, D.C., we would do a wreath laying ceremony. That's something we practiced often. We did those almost on a daily basis.
So the idea that somebody from France may want to go to the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier to lay a wreath, because for them
Correct.
it's a photo op, it's
Right.
an appreciation, and I visualize there's honor guard all over the place, but more importantly, somebody's carrying the wreath.
Correct.
Is that part of the role too?
Yes, that's part of the honor guard role.
Okay.
So you would have actually 2 people, one on each side of the wreath, bring it up to the tomb. Typically you would have 2 color guard units march up the steps from below the tomb, up the steps. And there are a lot of steps there. And you don't miss a step. That took practice. We practiced all night long. When the cemetery closes down, that's when we get there, and all night long we're practicing going up and down those steps without missing. And you had a team on one side and a team way over on the other side, and we had to be in step with each other coming up, so that when we crossed that top step, it had to be perfect.
The actual guards for the Tomb of
Yes.
the Unknown Soldier, are they a special unit unto themselves?
They are. They are part of the honor guard. They're part of the Army honor guard, but they're called the Old Guard. And so they're a division taken from that unit to do just that. There's also a large room under the Coliseum that's next to the tomb. That's a full lounge full of people, and I think oftentimes people watch the guard walking back and forth and think that he's the only one there to guard it. At any moment, 30 other Army people would be right there if he needed them. They're just sitting underneath there waiting. So
They got a view.
I remember them having a TV in their view.
Some monitor.
Some type of a monitor system where they were watching. But there's also other people stationed around the area if something should happen. People crossing the ropes, people trying to get to the tomb itself is totally unacceptable there. And there are people to help him. My term that I signed up for in the Air Force was 4 years. I did my 4 years, and after that they said, hey, would you like to stay a little bit longer? By the way, we'll give you an extra stripe if you do. For me, if we go back, my reason for going in the military was to get money for college. So with that in mind, I went in and I signed up immediately for their Veterans Education Assistance Program, the GI Bill, but different years it's been called different things. For every dollar that I would put in, the military would put in 2 into a savings account. So I maxed that out the whole 4 years I was there. The rest of my paycheck I had sent back home to Pennsylvania. So I never had 1 penny of my military pay during the whole time I was there. So what I did is I got a part-time job, which a lot of the members of the Honor Guard worked at this one mall very close by, and I got a job there, and so I had extra money there.
Security there?
No, I worked in a pinball arcade, handing out quarters to people. But I mean, the military provided you with all your food, your clothing, you had all your basic needs already taken care of, so you didn't need that. Well, after 4 years, I looked at how much money I had in my account, and I said, do I have enough to go to college? And I said, at that point, I probably did, but this was good duty. This wasn't bad. I enjoyed what I was doing. So I said, yes, you know what, I'll sign up for another 2 years and see where we're at that point. So I did. I ended up staying and extending.
In the Honor Guard?
In the Honor Guard,
Right.
yeah. So, and actually that turned out really well. I spent 2 more years there. By this time, I, of course, knew how to, you're no longer nervous. It's a job. You go to the job. You feel much more comfortable by then.
You know, we see as the public precision, total,
Yes.
utter precision. Did you see at times when it was imprecise? The error.
Yes. As I extended and went longer, I did end up joining the drill team, which is a very visual thing that people love seeing in parades and stuff. And that's when you're spinning your rifles and doing all the wonderful things. But all that's done with bayonets affixed to an M1 rifle. And it is very precision. I mean, you're within an inch of the person next to you. And that takes a lot of practice. Every day you're practicing and learning how to slam down a rifle next to a person beside you and not hit them. Even if they're an inch off, you have to not do it. I've been in parades and just events, ceremonies where that inch didn't work. And I remember at one time where you switch rifles with the person. You're tossing the rifle to the person ahead of you. The first person tosses over the head of everybody to the back. And I pick up the rifle, and now we're wearing white gloves. And all I see is red all over this rifle. And I'm going, oh, crap. So by the end of the ceremony, you get there, and what had happened at one point, when they came down, he sliced the back of the guy's uniform and cut him. Pulled it up, and when you do the toss, the blood gets all over everything. And so yeah, sometimes that happens. I also remember we do a gauntlet where you have two lines and rifles are spinning. And you typically have a senior member walk through that. Mm-hmm. Now, if it was an honor guard member, and we had lieutenants that would run the honor guard, I mean, they knew precise counts and things and walk through. But you often had other military ranking people who said, I want to do that. I want to be the star of the show and walk through that gauntlet and come out on the other side. That works good if they can get the count down and they understand the exact count that you have to do to walk through it. And we did have a general who insisted on doing it. He practiced several times so that we had it. During the ceremony, didn't go so well. He hesitated. One of the rifles knocked off his hat. The gauntlet was the spinning stopped immediately. And there are ways to stop things from happening. But I remember him being so furious and so angry, and afterwards coming back and yelling at everyone there as to how they could have done that to him and embarrassed him by making his hat fall off. So, yeah, things happen. It's not always perfect.
After the 2-year extra stint,
yes,
was there a moment saying that's it?
Yeah, I think I was ready.
Yeah.
I was ready to. During the time I was there, I took a few college courses, and I said, yeah, I really want to get my degree and go on with my life. But I have no bad memories of the military at all. There was nothing there that was negative. It was all positive. No, I went to Penn State University.
Excuse me, I'm sorry. Yeah. Penn State, okay, yeah.
So coming out of the military at Penn State, they asked me to take a test, and which I did, and obviously did well enough for them to accept me. They had a special program that they would accept military people because I wasn't straight out of high school. I wasn't their typical student. But I will say that helped me so much when I was in college. I went in there having already worked for 6 years and having the discipline to take classes and be at classes. So college became extremely easy for me. All my classes were from 8 a.m. till noon. After lunch, I went to work. I held down a 40-hour-a-week job when I was in college. It was, very simple, easy to do.
What'd you get your degree in?
Business marketing, so that I could someday open a business. That was my goal. Well, actually, while I was in college, I started creating T-shirts for different organizations, shirts with sayings on them, different designs. And someone in my class said, well, that's a business. I said, well, that's not a business. I'm just doing this for kind of fun of it. And they said, oh, I think it might be a business. And I said, well, maybe I'll put some ads in a local paper and sell some shirts this way or that way. Once I graduated, I applied for jobs all over, and a guy in Kansas said, oh, I'm opening a motel, looking for a manager. I said, okay. Now, I'm still young. I have no commitments. I have, nothing I have to do. So I travel out to the middle of Kansas in a small town and met with this guy. We hit it off really well. He said, I'm building a motel, and he actually owned a construction company and several fast food restaurants, but he had never owned a motel. And he said, can I just kind of leave it in your hands, and then we'll just build it up and I'll sell it after a couple years, kind of an investment thing. And I said, sure. So he hands me a notebook. This is how you run a motel. And I said, okay, this probably isn't going to do it. So I immediately went to a neighboring town and got a job at one of their motels so that I could learn the inside ropes of what I was doing. So I worked there for maybe 6 months while he was constructing the motel. He paid me as a consultant. And so once our motel opened, I felt very confident in opening it, ran it. The motel did well. For being in a small town, we became the #1 motel of the chain.
Wow.
So after 7 years, he offered me ownership in it, which I took. And but at some point I said, it's time for me to move on. So then I decided to take a job. The franchise, he was a franchise owner. So the company itself offered me a job working in theirs in Richmond, Virginia. So then I moved to Richmond, Virginia, where I took on district manager of 5 motels that they owned. Stayed there for quite a while. Now, all this time, back in college, that little T-shirt company that I did started growing and growing. And I did more and more and created a catalog and started doing mail order. So I had this little mail order business going wherever I went, and as long as there was a UPS truck available, I could continue doing mail order. Well, it got bigger and bigger, and eventually I said, well, I think I want to leave the motel stuff behind and just work on these T-shirts. So while I was in Virginia, I opened up a little store, and it went from T-shirts to adding dresses and pants and shirts and other things that went along with it. I learned about fashion shows and started going out to fashion shows and saying, oh, this is pretty good. I like this. So, knowing that my parents were getting older and from Warren, I said I should probably be moving back there. My brothers and sisters have been scattered all over the United States, and I said I can move back there and start taking care of them. So I ended up in Jamestown, New York, opened a store in Jamestown, and said, oh, this will be great, I'll be here. Unbeknownst to me, my parents then got a condo in Myrtle Beach, and so they would leave for the winters, and I would be up here in the wintertime. But it worked out really well. Started opening additional stores, and clothing became my life.
What was it known as?
White Daisy. White Daisy, yeah.
Daisy, okay.
And it still exists today.
Yeah.
Still have stores. Yeah, about 8 years ago, I guess, I decided to retire. I mean, it was something I had done my whole life, was clothing, and I said, okay. I had employees that had been with me a very long time, and promoted them. I promoted a girl to president of the company, and she kind of took over and did well, and I said, I'm not really needed on a regular basis here anymore. So I decided to retire. So the question was, what do I do in retirement? I was still young, going through my files of paperwork I accumulated over the years. I said, oh, I always wanted to have a small diner someplace. So my real estate agent was in my office one day, and we were talking about some properties, and she mentioned that there was a restaurant she had just listed. And I said, a restaurant? Wait, I might be interested in that. She said, well, it's way out in the middle of nowhere in a little town, Panama. So I said, I've heard of it. Couldn't even think of where it was or anything about it. So I drove out here to Panama, looked around, and I said, this will work. I could open a diner here. And yeah, it's 8 years ago.
My God.
My college education was business. And although each one of those has different sets of responsibilities, the business part of all of those is exactly the same. I realize that when people come into a diner, they see me cooking and serving the people, but that's really only about 10% of what I really do.
Sure.
Ordering food or ordering clothes, ordering supplies for motels, those are all the same. Paying the bills, making sure the numbers come out right. Those are the business aspect of it that makes a business successful. When small businesses open, a lot of people have a passion for that business or what they're doing, which is great, and that's the need you have to start with. But without the business background, that's where a lot of businesses fail. They just don't know how to manage the money or the accounts to go with it.
But part and parcel what the public sees as a short order cook.
Yes.
How did you learn that?
Well, as one of my waitresses went back and researched me, when I was 12 years old, I went to cooking school. So that was probably my start of a passion for wanting to cook. And I will say my mother said with 5 boys, she said, all of you need to know how to cook. And she would teach us, but she insisted that we go to cooking school to make sure that we had that skill set in there. And it helped along the way. When I had motels, some of them in Virginia did have restaurants in them. So although I had a restaurant manager, it was nice to have the knowledge behind it as to whether they were doing a good job.
You weren't a professional at KP.
No, I wasn't. No, actually, being in Washington, and this is probably why I stayed extra long, hearing stories from other military people. Our dining hall was one used to show off.
Yeah.
So when my dad came to visit me in Washington, I took him on tour of the base. And I said, oh, we should stop and have lunch at the dining hall. He said, okay, sounds good. Now, again, he was old Army. He says, do we need to line up a certain way to sit next to? I said, no, I don't think we have to worry about that. So we walk in, we're greeted by a hostess who says, how many in your party? I said, oh, there's going to be 4 of us today. And she goes, all right, right this way. My dad's first remark was, there are tablecloths on the table. I said, yes, of course. Isn't that what Army people have, military people have? So we sat down, waitress comes over and says, what would you like? And he said, well, what are they serving today? And she said, we can make you anything in the world. We had a team of chefs working there that would make anything. And I realized, especially after talking to other military people, that we had it really good.
My gosh. Oh,
so the price I paid for having everything in order in my dorm room or things of that, we had a great dining hall. We used the officers club. The base consisted of 40 generals, so most of the people there were high-ranking, educated people that you would run into on a daily basis. So it was very good duty.
This has been great, Mark. Knowing that I had been pursuing this opportunity to interview you, and here we are today. Is there a question I haven't asked that I should have asked?
Question you have not asked? No, I don't think so. I think I tried to serve in the military the best I could. I tried to serve the country. I have, and I do encourage young people to join the military. I think it's a great opportunity, a great training ground for people. I would love to see a situation where everyone served the government for at least 2 years, just to make sure they understand how the country works.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it gives you a greater perspective on most things.
Terrific. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Appreciate it.